Have you ever wondered what happens when the world around you falls completely silent, when your last heartbeat fades and you realize you are no longer part of the living? Imagine opening your eyes and finding nothing. No light, no sound, no sense of direction. Only a darkness so heavy it feels alive, wrapping around you like a shroud. This is where my near-death experience began, and it is not the comforting tunnel of light people like to imagine. It was the opposite. The air felt thick, almost breathing, pressing against my skin as if unseen hands were holding me in place. Every breath I took felt stolen, as if I was inhaling time itself, a time that no longer belonged to me. I had heard stories of heaven and hell before, but nothing could have prepared me for this place. There was no fire, no screaming, only a silence so deep it roared in my head. The ground beneath me wasn't even solid. It pulsed faintly, like the heart of something vast and alive, and with every pulse I felt my soul sinking further into what could only be described as eternal darkness. This wasn't a dream, it wasn't some fleeting vision. It was real, and I was trapped in it, cut off from everything I had ever known. In that moment, one thought echoed through me louder than the silence itself. Is this what happens after death? Is this the reality no one tells you about when your soul leaves your body? Every second stretched into something infinite. Every moment felt like a sentence, and the absence of a sound became more terrifying than any scream. I wanted to believe there was a way back, but even that hope felt like it was dissolving, swallowed by the weight of the void around me. Before I tell you what broke that silence, before I tell you what called to me in the dark, I need you to stop and think. What do you believe really happens after we die? Could your soul survive a place like this, where there is no escape, no warmth, no voice but your own thoughts echoing forever? Tell me in the comments what you think would happen to you if this was your final destination, because what I experienced next still chills me to the core. And if you want to hear the rest of this journey, make sure you subscribe now, because what I am about to share is not something you will want to miss. The silence didn't last forever. Something was waiting in that darkness, and it knew my name. At first, I tried to convince myself that this was just some kind of dream, that my mind was playing tricks on me as it drifted between life and death. But the longer I stayed there, the heavier it became, the more undeniable it was. This was not sleep. This was not a dream, and it was nothing like life. The realization began to press against my chest like an anchor, crushing me from the inside out. There was no pulse in my veins, no heartbeat in my chest, just a slow, cold awareness seeping through every part of me, whispering a truth I didn't want to face. I was dead, and this was what waited for me on the other side. The weight of that thought grew with every passing moment, pulling me deeper into the reality of it. I wasn't floating in some peaceful void. I was grounded in a darkness that felt purposeful, as though it existed solely to hold me there. It wasn't just the absence of light or sound that terrified me. It was the suffocating feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here, that something had gone terribly wrong. My thoughts became louder in the silence, each one echoing back to me as though the darkness itself wanted me to hear them, wanted me to feel every ounce of fear and dread building inside me. And then came the guilt. It didn't rush in like a wave. It bled into me slowly, creeping under my skin until it was all I could feel. Every choice I had made, every selfish decision, every word I had spoken in anger or indifference, all of it started playing in my mind without sound, like old, broken reels of film flickering in the dark. There was no voice condemning me, no booming declaration of judgment, but the memories themselves were enough. It was as if this place had stripped away every excuse, every justification, and left me exposed to the raw truth of who I really was. There were no flames licking at my feet, no screaming souls or demonic laughter echoing in the void, but somehow that made it worse. The silence was deliberate. It gave me nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no distraction from the weight of my own life flashing before me. Every regret felt heavier, every betrayal sharper, every act of pride and cruelty cutting deeper, because there was no one else to blame, no one else to look at but myself. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, dense with the weight of everything I had carried but refused to acknowledge while I was alive. And though I couldn't see anyone, I could feel it. Something was there, watching, not with eyes, but with a presence so consuming it felt like the darkness itself was alive and aware of me. It didn't move closer. It didn't speak, but its stillness was a threat all its own. It was waiting, patient, as though it had all of eternity to observe and decide what to do with me. That sensation of being watched, of being measured, made my skin crawl, even though I no longer knew if I even had a body in the way I once did. It felt like my very soul was being scrutinized, weighed in a way no human judgment could ever match. I wanted to scream, to cry out just to hear something, anything, but the sound wouldn't come. My voice was gone, or maybe it had never been there in this place at all. Even my thoughts felt like they were not entirely my own anymore, as if they were being amplified and reflected back at me by the darkness, each one sharper and heavier than when it first crossed my mind. There was no escape from it, no distraction, no waking up, because this was not a nightmare that I could shake off. This was the truth, and it was as real as the life I had just left behind. The longer I stayed in that silence, the more the fear evolved into something deeper. It was no longer just fear of where I was, but fear of why I was there. I began to understand, in a way I couldn't put into words, that this place was not random. It was not a void I had stumbled into by accident. I was here because every step of my life, every decision, every rejection of the things I knew deep down to be right, had led me to this moment. And as that truth settled in, it became heavier than any weight I had ever felt before, because I couldn't argue with it. I couldn't deny it. It was all mine. Somewhere in the distance, or maybe from within the darkness itself, a subtle shift began to stir, though I couldn't see or hear what it was. It was like the air had changed, colder, denser, almost as if the place itself was taking a breath, preparing for something. I could feel it pressing closer, that unseen presence, patient but purposeful, as though the waiting was about to end, and all I could do was stand there, alone in that oppressive silence, knowing that whatever was about to happen next would change everything. It happened without any warning, without any sign that something was about to change. The silence that had wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud, the kind of silence that presses on your chest until you feel like you can't breathe, finally broke. But it didn't break with a scream, or the sound of chains, or the cries of the damned like I had always imagined hell would. It broke with a whisper, a single deliberate whisper that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The sound was faint, almost gentle, but there was no comfort in it. It was low, measured, and it spoke with a kind of authority that didn't need to be loud to terrify me. It said my name, slowly, once, and then again. Each time, the way it carried through the air made my soul freeze, as if the darkness itself had become a mouth, breathing out those syllables just for me. It didn't sound like a human voice, but it didn't sound entirely inhuman either. It was something between, something wrong, something that made me realize this was no accident, no random drift of my spirit. I was known here, I was expected. The echo of it wasn't like any echo I had ever heard. It didn't fade into the distance. It wrapped around me, circling me, pressing in closer as if the air itself was repeating the sound. Every time I heard my name bounce off the unseen walls of this void, it carried a different weight, as though each repetition was layering something onto me, a heaviness that had nothing to do with my body and everything to do with my soul. The sound wasn't sharp, it wasn't violent, but it sank into me deeper than any scream ever could, settling into places inside me I didn't even know existed. There was something final about the way it was spoken, something that made every hair on what I still thought of as my body stand on end. It wasn't just a call, it felt like a judgment, like each syllable was a verdict being read aloud. And the darkness wasn't just speaking my name, it was claiming it. I could feel my heart, or whatever part of me still resembled one, start to pound with a rhythm that didn't belong to me. It was as if the place itself had a pulse, and it was trying to make mine match its own, dragging me into its cadence, into its reality. I tried to call back, to ask who or what was there, but no sound came out. My lips moved, or at least I thought they did, but my Voice was swallowed before it could even form. All that existed was that whisper, and the way it slithered into every corner of me, curling around thoughts and memories I didn't even want to think about. It was like the voice didn't just know my name, it knew everything tied to it, every secret, every sin, every shame I had ever buried deep enough that I thought no one, not even I, would have to face it again. And yet, here it was, unearthed by nothing more than a single, quiet call, the dread that came with hearing it wasn't the kind of panic you feel when you're startled or when you know you're in danger. This was deeper, heavier, a kind of existential terror that no scream could match. It wasn't fear of pain or death, because I was already past both of those. It was fear of recognition, fear of being seen completely, fear of the inescapable truth that whatever had called my name already knew what I was and why I was here. There was no hiding, no pretending, no excuses. The darkness didn't just know me. It understood me in a way no living person ever could, and that understanding felt like a blade carving into every piece of who I was. Every time my name left that unseen mouth, I felt weaker, smaller, as though parts of me were being stripped away with each repetition. Not physically, but something deeper, something that made me feel like I was unraveling. My thoughts became harder to hold on to, as if the sound was picking apart the threads of who I was. And through all of it, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't just being called, I was being summoned. This wasn't a random sound drifting through the void. It was a deliberate pull, a tether meant to drag me closer to something I could not yet see. The silence between each whisper became just as terrifying as the whispers themselves. It wasn't a relief when the voice stopped. It was worse, because in those pauses I could feel the anticipation building. The darkness felt heavier, pressing closer, as though it was waiting for me to move or to respond, testing how far I could be pushed before I broke. And in those stretches of awful stillness, I realized something I had been trying not to admit since I first arrived here. This place wasn't just aware of me, it wanted something from me. And whatever it was getting closer with every breath, every whisper, every time my name was spoken into the void. The second time it called me, the sound changed slightly, not in pitch or volume, but in weight. It felt sharper, heavier, like it had grown teeth. It clung to me even after it stopped, lingering in the air like smoke I couldn't breathe away. My chest tightened, as if the sound itself had wrapped around my ribs, squeezing until the thought of breathing felt impossible. There was no escaping the sound, no escaping the knowledge that something in this endless, pulsing darkness knew who I was and had chosen to make itself known. And still, no other sound followed. No footsteps, no rustling, no scream in the distance. Just the echo of my name fading into the void over and over until it was impossible to tell if I was actually hearing it anymore or if it had rooted itself inside my head. The longer it went on, the more I felt that same cold shift in the air I had sensed before, the one that told me the waiting was coming to an end. The darkness wasn't just calling me anymore. It was moving. It was closing in. Before you continue with this content that shows you what it's like to stand face to face with eternal judgment, you need to check out the ebook Secrets of Life. This book reveals deep teachings from the scriptures, truths long forgotten by many, lessons that will strengthen your faith, restore your spirit, and help you understand God's path, even in your darkest moments. It's not just another book. It's a warning, a spiritual map for those who feel on the edge, between faith and emptiness, between the calling and the abyss. You don't have to wait for a life-altering wake-up call to open your eyes. After this video, click the link in the description and begin your spiritual turnaround today, because tomorrow might be too late. The whisper finally faded, leaving behind a hollow echo that seemed to seep into the air itself. For a moment, I thought the silence had returned, that I could find a way to calm my thoughts in the stillness. But something had changed. The air no longer felt like it was simply surrounding me. It felt denser, colder, as though every breath I tried to take was filtered through something ancient and heavy. It was as if the void itself had inhaled, as if something beyond my understanding was slowly waking up. The darkness around me, once still and suffocating, began to shift. It didn't move with shape or form, but in a way that made me feel as though the blackness itself was alive, bending and pulling with every breath I took. The more it moved, the closer it felt. Not like a wind or a presence approaching from one direction, but like the entire space was tightening, wrapping itself around me, pushing me into a center I hadn't even realized existed. The isolation I had felt before, that terrifying emptiness where I was alone with my thoughts, began to change into something worse. I was no longer alone. I was being surrounded, not by anything I could see, but by a weight, a density, a sensation that I was no longer just standing in this place. I was being watched, measured, and marked. It didn't feel like one presence but many, as though the very shadows carried a consciousness, a judgment, each one aware of me in a way I couldn't comprehend. I could feel the weight of their attention pressing down, not physically, but in a way that made my soul tremble. There were no voices now, no whispers, just a growing pressure that told me I was no longer an observer in this place. I had become the focus. The thought clawed at me, digging into a fear far deeper than anything I had felt in life. I was not just lost in this darkness, I was on display. Every breath became a struggle, not because there was no air, but because every inhale felt like it pulled the darkness closer, as though with each breath I invited it further into me. The shadows, if they could even be called that, seemed to pulse and shift in time with my breaths, like they were alive and feeding on the rhythm of my existence. There were no shapes, no figures to recognize, but the movement itself was enough to make me understand that this place was not empty. It was full, saturated with something older than time, something that didn't need form to assert its presence. The heaviness grew until it felt like the ground, or whatever I was standing on, began to sink beneath me. It wasn't a fall, not yet, but it felt like the very foundation of this place was softening, as though the darkness itself could open and swallow me whole whenever it decided the time was right. Every instinct I had left screamed at me to hold still, to not breathe, to not move, because every action seemed to draw more attention from whatever was now circling me. But standing still did nothing to ease the dread. The pressure only intensified, building in waves, crushing what little hope I had left of escaping this void. The temperature dropped further, not in a physical sense, but in a way that made my very essence feel brittle, like my soul itself could crack under the weight of what was happening. The cold wasn't just around me, it was in me, threading through my thoughts, slowing everything down, making it harder to think, harder to resist the pull of whatever was waking in the dark. I began to feel small, insignificant, as though my entire existence was being reduced to something so fragile that even a whisper could shatter it. Then came the sensation of judgment. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't announced, but it was unmistakable. I could feel myself being weighed, evaluated, as if every regret, every mistake, every selfish act I had ever committed was being placed on invisible scales. There was no sound, no declaration of guilt, but the silence carried its own verdict. It told me without words that I was exposed, that there was no hiding here, no second chances. Whatever was in the dark wasn't just observing, it was deciding. And with that realization, the darkness seemed to close in even tighter. The space itself felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the very reality around me was collapsing inward. The shadows no longer felt distant or formless. They felt near, brushing against the edges of my awareness, not with a touch I could feel on my skin, but with a weight that pressed against my mind and soul. Every ounce of courage, every sliver of defiance I might have had, was being stripped away, replaced with an overwhelming sense of submission, not because I wanted to surrender, but because resisting felt impossible under the magnitude of whatever was awakening in that void. It was then that I realized something crucial, something that sent a deeper shiver through me than even the whisper of my name had. The darkness wasn't just aware of me. It wasn't just surrounding me. It was preparing for something. Every shift in the air, every pull of the shadows, every tightening of the space told me the same thing. This was not a passive void. This was a place with purpose. Something vast and ancient had begun to stir. and it wasn't going to stay unseen forever. Whatever hope I had left was shrinking by the second, smothered by the weight pressing inward, by the knowledge that whatever came next would not be something I could stop. It started like a trickle, a faint hum inside my mind, a subtle stirring that I almost mistook for my own thoughts trying to keep me sane. But the longer I stood in that suffocating dark, the stronger it became, until it wasn't just thoughts anymore. It was a flood. One memory after another began to tear through me in sharp, vivid flashes, each one striking harder than the last. I saw myself in moments I had long buried, moments I thought time had softened, times I had spoken words that cut others, times I had chosen myself over someone who needed me, times I had let my anger dictate my actions even when I knew it would leave scars. There was no voice narrating these memories, no voice condemning me, but they came with a clarity that was more painful than any accusation could have been. Each scene burned into me as if it were happening all over again. Only now, there was no way to turn away, no way to distract myself, no way to excuse or explain why I had done what I did. It wasn't just the big mistakes either. It was the little ones, the things I thought no one had noticed, the things I had convinced myself didn't matter, the half-truths I told to save face, the times I chose silence when I should have spoken up, the selfish thoughts I never acted on but still carried like invisible stains. Every single one of them rose to the surface, raw and undeniable, and they stacked inside my mind like weights pressing down, suffocating any hope of escape. There were no demons holding me down, no flames licking at my feet, no monstrous figures punishing me, and somehow that made it infinitely worse. The darkness didn't need to threaten me. It didn't need to torture me in any way I could see or touch. It simply showed me myself, stripped away every layer I had built to protect who I thought I was, and forced me to face what I had always known but never wanted to admit. It was like standing in front of a mirror that didn't reflect the body, only the soul, and what I saw was more terrifying than any creature the mind could conjure. The silence around me felt heavier with each passing moment, as though it was alive, pulsing with an energy that fed on every flicker of regret, every drop of shame pouring out of me. The more I remembered, the stronger the darkness seemed to grow, as if it was drawing power from my unraveling. It was no longer just a void I was standing in. It was a presence, one that didn't need to speak or move to make its intentions clear. It wanted me to break. It wanted me to feel the totality of what I had done, not in some abstract sense, but as if each memory, each failure, was a chain being wrapped around my very soul. I tried to close my eyes, to shut out the flashes, but there was no escape. The memories weren't outside me, they were inside, and they came whether I wanted them to or not. I felt myself shrink, with every image, every scene replayed, as if the weight of my own life was pressing me further down into the darkness. There was no sound except the pounding of thoughts in my mind, no screams, no voices, and that made the experience so much worse. In the quiet, every memory echoed like a scream I couldn't make. The darkness didn't just watch. It felt sentient, like it was inside my head, amplifying every regret until it became unbearable. Things I had once brushed off as insignificant suddenly, felt enormous, like each one was a stone being added to a growing pile crushing me from above. The shame felt alive, clawing at me, twisting into something sharp and cold that burrowed deep into my chest. I could almost hear the unspoken judgment in the air around me, not as words, but as a vibration, a pressure that made my very being ache. I had thought silence would bring some relief after the whisper of my name, after the shifting shadows, but this silence was a different kind of torment. It wasn't peace. It was the stillness before something worse, the kind of pause that only exists so that the weight of what you're facing can fully settle in. I realized then that this was no ordinary void. This was a place where the soul is stripped bare and forced to stand before the totality of itself, unable to turn away, unable to deny, unable to hide. It felt endless, like time didn't exist here, or maybe it existed only to stretch each memory, each pang of guilt, each wave of shame into something so long and heavy that it felt eternal. Every breath I took seemed to pull the darkness tighter around me, making it harder to separate where I ended and where this place began. And with every passing moment, the question grew louder in my head, even though no one had spoken it. How much more of myself would be peeled away before there was nothing left? The absence of screams, the lack of fire, the stillness that pressed down on me made the reality even more terrifying than the most vivid depictions of hell I had ever heard. Because this wasn't punishment by some external force. This wasn't a demon wielding chains or a pit of fire waiting to swallow me. This was something far worse. It was me, my life, my choices, all of it laid bare in a place where there was no escaping the truth and no drowning it out with noise or distraction. The darkness didn't need to burn me or tear me apart. It only needed me to see, to feel, and to understand what I had become. Every second felt like it was designed to strip away the last fragments of denial I still held. Every flash of memory slicing through whatever resistance I had left. And though there was still no sound beyond the echoes in my head, I could feel something else stirring again in that void. Something beyond the memories. Something that made the air thicken even more. As if the confrontation with myself was only the beginning, and the true weight of this place had yet to reveal itself. For what felt like an eternity, I was drowning in that oppressive void, stripped of everything but the weight of my own soul. The silence had become unbearable. The memories and regrets had clawed through me until I felt hollow, and the darkness seemed to press closer with every breath, as if it was preparing to claim me completely. I had begun to accept that this was it, that whatever this place was, whatever purpose it held, it had already decided my fate. There was no exit, no rescue, just an endless descent into a silence. So alive it could devour me whole. I didn't cry, because even the tears felt stolen from me. I didn't speak, because there was no sound left in me to break the stillness. It was only me, my failures, and the void that seemed eager to swallow the last flicker of what I once was. And then, without any warning, it shifted. Not in sight, not in sound, but in sensation. At first, it was so faint, I thought my mind was playing another cruel trick on me, like another memory slipping into the cracks of my thoughts. But it wasn't a memory. It was real. Somewhere far off, so far it felt unreachable. There was something different. It wasn't light, not in the way we understand it, but a subtle, distant warmth that pressed against the endless cold. It felt like the barest touch of sunlight on a frozen landscape, faint enough to question, but powerful enough to notice. That warmth didn't come with a voice or an image. It came with a feeling, a single unspoken question that sank deep into me, bypassing words entirely. Do you want to leave this place? It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even a true invitation. There was no assurance that moving toward it would save me, no clear escape waiting on the other side. But the question hung there like a thread in the darkness, the first thread of choice I had been given since all of this began. For the first time since my name had been called, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't fear or shame. It was faint, so faint I could barely recognize it, but it was there. Hope. The darkness felt it too. I could sense it, because as soon as that warmth touched me, the void responded. The cold grew sharper, heavier, almost desperate, as if the place itself wanted to remind me that I was still marked, still weighed down, still trapped. The shadows, the same living blackness that had surrounded me, seemed to thicken and pull tighter, closing in as if to keep me from moving, from even daring to think I could reach whatever that faint presence was. Every step, even the first hesitant motion forward, felt like trying to walk with chains wrapped around my chest and legs. The darkness didn't move like a physical barrier, but every inch I tried to gain felt resisted, like an invisible weight pushing me backward. It wasn't just the cold or the heaviness. It was the memories again, surging up, sharper now, louder in my mind, each one screaming in silence to hold me in place. Every failure I had faced, every regret I had drowned out, in life was thrown in my path like a wall I couldn't climb. The void wasn't done with me, not yet, and it wanted me to know that if I reached for that glimmer, I would be leaving nothing behind. It would follow, it would remember, and it would wait. But that question wouldn't leave me. Do you want to leave this place? It came again, not as sound, not as light, but as a weight of its own, one that felt entirely different from the crushing pull of the void. It didn't demand, it didn't threaten, it simply waited, patient, as though the universe itself didn't need to force an answer out of me. I had to choose, and that choice carried a kind of terror unlike anything I had felt so far. Because if I said no, if I stayed, I knew this place would consume me until I wasn't even a shadow of what I used to be. But if I said yes, if I reached for that distant warmth, I had no idea what was waiting on the other side. My first step toward it was slow, unsure, like testing ground I couldn't see. The darkness reacted instantly, pulling tighter, the cold biting deeper, the silence growing so thick it felt like it could crush me where I stood. It wasn't just resisting me, it was alive, aware, and unwilling to let me go without a fight. I felt the whisper of my name return, softer now, but more deliberate, dragging along the edges of my mind like a hook, a reminder that I was known here, that I was part of this place whether I wanted to be or not. But I kept moving, one step, another. The warmth didn't grow stronger quickly. It stayed faint, distant, like it was testing me just as much as the darkness was. Each breath was harder than the last, each thought weighed down by the memories the void kept feeding me. My failures, my selfishness, my anger. They weren't just memories anymore. They felt like hands pulling me back, voices without sound whispering that I didn't deserve to leave, that no matter where I went, this place would always be part of me. And maybe it would. Maybe that was the truth. But I kept walking, because even if that warmth was faint, even if it was unreachable, it was something other than this, something beyond the endless black that wanted me still. As I took another step, the shadows shifted around me. They didn't retreat, but they circled, slower now, as though they knew something I didn't. The silence didn't break, but it grew deeper, thicker, almost humming, as if the entire void was holding its breath. The warmth ahead felt no closer, but my awareness of it sharpened, enough to realize something crucial. The darkness wasn't leaving, it wasn't disappearing, it was following. Even if I reached that distant sensation, even if I answered yes to that unspoken question, this place would not release me fully. It would remain behind, alive, aware, and waiting for the moment I faltered. I didn't know what would happen if I kept going, or if that faint glimmer would ever become anything real. I didn't know if the question meant salvation, or simply a different kind of test. But as the void pulsed around me, as the shadows lingered like a living memory, I knew I couldn't stand still any longer. I took another step forward, the warmth still barely there, the darkness brushing at my back like it wanted to remind me that it would never forget my name. Now, I need to know something from you. If you were here, in this place, hearing that unspoken question, feeling the cold pulling you back as something faint and distant asked if you wanted to leave, what would you do? Would you take the step forward or let the void close around you forever? Leave your answer in the comments, because what I am about to share next will change how you see not only this story, but the one that's coming. These two are connected, and what happens next will reveal a truth I didn't understand until much later. Stay with me, because the next chapter will make you question everything you thought you knew about what waits beyond the dark.